Good evening, black people and all allies fighting for black liberation, black prosperity, and black joy. I'm Charles Blow, and welcome to Prime. Today marks 1 year since Joe Biden officially took office as President of the United States. President Biden's first year has been a tumultuous one. He has passed some landmark legislation like the largest infrastructure bill in the nation's history at $1.2 trillion and a $1.9 trillion COVID relief plan. But he has fallen short on things like voting rights and police reform. In the eyes of many political analysts and black voters specifically, Biden's year as president has been lackluster. Earlier today, I had the opportunity to speak with White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre about Biden's performance as president and upholding his commitments to black voters. Here is our conversation. Karine, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is the 1 year anniversary of the Biden presidency. He's had some big wins this year, but he's also had some big losses, including things that directly impact black voters like police reform and voting rights reform. What is the White House's message to black voters in particular on this 1 year anniversary?
Well, I want to say this to black voters, and this is something that the president believes and the vice president, which is we're going to continue to fight for the black community, the African American community. This is something that the president and the vice president has done throughout their careers. As you speak about the legislations that did not go through. Yes, we were disappointed with the George Floyd Policing Act that did not get through, but the president is going to use every lever of the administration to make sure that we do get things done on that front from our side of things, and so that is it's critical, it's crucial, and it's something that is so important and is still very much a priority for this president. I do want to say that when the president stepped into the White House a year ago, we were dealing with so many crises. Racial inequality was one of them. COVID, as we all know, the economy. And the president got to work. And when you look at racial equity, one of the things that he did was he signed an executive order on day one saying that he wanted to make sure there was diversity and inclusion across the federal government in finding, and that was one of the ways he was trying to figure out how we're going to deal with that issue, making sure that government contracts went to diverse groups, diverse communities, trying to up that by 50%. So those are the ways that he really worked through. And if you think about the American Rescue Plan, which was a historic piece of legislation that only Democrats voted for, it helped brown and black communities as well. When you think about the child tax credit and the child poverty going down amongst those communities because of the American Rescue Plan, and just putting those extra few dollars in people's pockets. So there were things that we did that directly affected our community, because the president, with his economic policy, was very clear from day one. He always said, when in putting forth an economic plan, to not leave anybody behind. So many people get left behind, and he didn't want to make sure that communities, black communities, brown communities, were left behind. So he made sure that they came with us as we restarted the economy.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how that focus may not be kind of settling in the way that the White House might want it to. The president's approval rating, according to Gallup poll, at the 1 year mark stands at 40%. That's lower than Trump's approval rating at the 1 year mark. Gallup also shows that black voters are drifting away from the president. And also, according to the latest Quinnipiac poll, although Biden won 87% of the black vote in 2020, his approval rating among black voters has now fallen to 57%, and that's down from 78% in April. What does the White House do to turn that perception around?
Yeah, the president spoke to this yesterday, Charles, in his press conference, and he talked about the things that he's going to do differently. One of them, which is very important, he believes, and is something that he loves to do, is just getting out there and making sure that he's connecting directly with the community. This is something that he has not been able to do with dealing with these multiple crises that I just laid out at the beginning of our conversation. And so I think the American public, and he believes the American public, want to hear directly from him as to what he is doing and getting out of this zip code that we are currently in. But we understand as well, and he spoke to this as well, that, COVID, people are tired of COVID. And we know that is affecting a lot of how people's perception. They want to get to the other side of this. They're tired. We're going into year 3 of dealing with this pandemic, an unprecedented pandemic. But because of this president, we are in a different place than we were a year ago. 75% of American public are fully vaccinated, where a year ago it was less than 1%. So he has put together a comprehensive plan to get us going, to try and control COVID. And this is not going to be forever. And we're going to work very hard to get on the other side of it. But to your point, we need to get out there. He believes he needs to get out there to talk about the American Rescue Plan, to talk about what his administration is doing to make people's lives better, in particular, the Black community.
Yesterday, the president, during his press conference, seemed to suggest that if the voting rights bills did not pass, that there may be some question about the legitimacy of future elections. Well, those bills did not pass. So what is the White House's position on what the president said yesterday?
So he was actually saying the opposite answering the opposite of the question. And what I mean by that is he wasn't saying that he doesn't trust the legitimacy or he won't trust the legitimacy of 2022. What he was trying to say is the opposite of that, which is in 2020, what we saw during the middle of COVID, during voter suppression too, as I know you know, Charles, people came out. They came out and they voted, and they came out through COVID, they came out through voter suppression, and that's very important. And that's what he was trying to highlight. But what we saw was the big lie, right? We saw the former president, the last administration, trying to encourage folks to overturn election officials, to overturn people's ballots, and all predicated on that big lie, as we talk about. And so that's what he was saying, and that's what he was trying to highlight, and the importance of getting voting rights legislation passed. As you know, Charles, I know you've talked about this on your show, 19 states across the country, done by Republican legislatures, have passed laws that's going to make it very difficult for people to vote, and that's going to affect brown and Black people, poor people in particular. And that shouldn't be. We should be making it easier for people to vote. This is something that the president has been fighting for his entire life as senator, and now as president. So has the vice president. She's been leading on this effort. So we are disappointed, but we are not deterred, and we're going to continue to be all hands on deck on this, and making this continue to make this a priority.
Just so that we are clear, the president will not question the legitimacy of the 2020 election or the 2024 election?
No, and I'm glad that you asked me that question. That is a no. He will not.
Okay, let's talk about the voting rights bill a little bit more. What do you say to critics who say that the president jumped in fully, forcefully, publicly, a little bit too late in the game to get voting rights across the finish line?
You know, I would respectfully disagree on those criticisms, because if you go back to the joint session to Congress that the president did, he talked about voting rights. If you go back to the commemoration or the acknowledgement of when he went to the Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, he talked about it. He talked about it in a big way of voting rights. And he went to Philadelphia and talked about voting rights. So this is something that he has done throughout this past 11, 12 months. And not only that, he passed on Selma, on the anniversary of Selma Bloody Sunday, when instead of giving words on right, commemorating that anniversary, he actually passed an executive order on making sure that the federal government played its role on making it easier to vote, making voting access a real thing on the federal level. So he's been working on this issue.
Right. But Karine, As you and I both know, though, the way that it was going to happen was if the filibuster was altered. The president said nothing, didn't even mention the filibuster in Philadelphia, and I don't think he did so when he was in Tulsa either. The question was whether or not he was jumping in forcefully on saying that he was behind altering the filibuster or changing it in an unequivocal way. Even in the two town halls that he had, both with CNN, one with Don Lemon and one with Anderson Cooper, he raised the idea that he might be open to it, but then said that he didn't want to get into that fight early because he was still focused on Build Back Better. The criticism has been whether or not he was forcefully engaged and clear on the issue of the filibuster earlier.
Look, I think that, when it comes to the filibuster, he's talked about it across the past 6 months. I hear your question. Was he clear about it? He was clear about it recently, and that matters. This is someone who understands the institution of this president understands the institution of the Senate. He was a senator for 40 years, and he understands how that works. And so he wanted to focus on what he can do as president, right? We didn't have the votes for the filibuster. He understood that 6 months ago. And so that's why he focused on what he could do, which is bringing senators and congressional members here to have the conversation on how we can get voting rights done, because the votes weren't there. And that's why he wasn't out there very early forcefully on that issue. And he did everything else that he could, right? He went out into states and talked about it.
Well, help us understand this, because
tried to corral the American public behind the issue.
Well, then help us to understand this, because the president seemed to suggest that he was placing pressure on senators privately. So if he believed that the votes weren't there and that's why he wasn't saying anything about it, why would he be negotiating to try to get them to change those behind the scenes? The question is, the bully pulpit, as you guys understand.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to talk through it. He was saying that he had been quiet about it, about talking about voting rights, and now he was ready to talk about it more forcefully. And so, he's been having conversations, and he said this behind closed doors for the past 6-7 months about a bunch of things. Yes, about filibuster and voting rights and how it's connected to getting voting rights done. Yes, he was having those conversations, but you were asking me publicly, why didn't he talk about it in a public way? And he understands, because he's been in the Senate and he knows how the Senate works, that the votes weren't there. So what he wanted to do is to try to see how he could move people in a quiet way and how he can have those conversations in a way that we can get to a solution. And so finally, after having those conversations, doing those talks, he said, you know what, we have to move forward with the filibuster. In a public way.
So where do voting rights go from here? It has failed in the Senate. Do you break it up? Do you try to get other things passed? This idea of reforming the electoral count, which is, I guess, an important thing, but it is not the thing that is going to protect black people's votes. So we agree. Right. So where does this go from here?
So look, where this goes, the president clearly was disappointed. He put out a statement yesterday about the results of voting rights. He disappointed but not deterred. He's been here before. He was in the Senate and was there during the times where voting rights had to be passed multiple times. He has been there before. He has seen this before. And so he's not deterred. He or the vice president, they're going to continue to fight for this. It doesn't end here. They're going to continue to make sure that they're working with states, that we're working with states as an administration. And one of the things, too, I want to make really clear is that the DOJ, we have doubled our civil rights department because of this, understanding the fights that are going to come along. And so we are doing the work that we can on the federal level to get this done, to make sure that people's votes are protected. And there's going to be more work that we're going to be able to announce and to talk about. And so we're going to use the levers of the White House to make sure that we do our part on the federal government to protect people's rights to vote.
Karine Jean-Pierre, thank you so much for making time for us tonight. We really appreciate it.